What happens when an entitled former royal walks into one of television's most unforgiving arenas? Tonight, we witnessed television history. As Meghan Markle sat down with Bill Maher for what was supposed to be a routine interview, but it quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations late-night TV has ever seen. The tension was palpable from the moment she walked onto the stage. By the end, security had to escort her out as the audience erupted. The HBO studio buzzed with anticipation as Maher prepared for what producers had billed as a straightforward conversation. Meghan, dressed in a perfectly tailored cream blazer that likely cost more than most people's rent, settled into the guest chair with a practiced smile honed through years of royal training. The audience, a mix of Maher's politically savvy regulars, applauded politely as the cameras rolled. "So, Meghan," Maher began, leaning back in his chair with his signature smirk, "you've been pretty vocal about privacy lately, yet here you are on another talk show. How do you reconcile that?" The question landed like a challenge. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered, but Maher caught it. So did the cameras. "Well, Bill, I think there's a difference between sharing your truth and having your privacy invaded," she replied, her tone carefully measured. "Your truth," Maher repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's interesting phrasing. Is there more than one version of the truth now?" A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Meghan shifted in her seat, her designer heels clicking against the floor. "I think everyone has their own perspective on events, don't you?" "Sure," Maher countered. "But facts are facts, right? Either something happened or it didn't. For instance, there were some serious accusations during that Oprah interview about racism in the royal family. But when pressed for specifics, things got vague, didn't they?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Meghan straightened her posture, fixing him with a stare sharp enough to freeze champagne. "I think what I shared with Oprah was very clear and very honest," she said, her voice edged with controlled defensiveness. "Was it, though?" Maher pressed. "Because here's the thing. You made bombshell claims about conversations regarding your son's skin color, but then you and Harry said you wouldn't name names because it would be too damaging. Convenient, don't you think?" The audience fell silent. This wasn't the soft interview Meghan's team had expected. Her publicist in the front row typed frantically on her phone, likely strategizing a way out. "I don't think there's anything convenient about protecting people who frankly don't deserve protection," Meghan shot back. "But I chose to take the high road." "The high road?" Maher laughed without humor. "You went on international TV and essentially called the royal family racist, but you won't say who actually said what. That's not the high road. That's having your cake and eating it too." Her composure began to crack. Meghan's jaw tightened as she gripped the armrest until her knuckles turned white. "I think you're mischaracterizing what happened," she said through gritted teeth. "Am I?" Maher pushed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you wanted all the drama and sympathy of being a victim without the accountability that comes with making specific accusations." "You don't know what you're talking about," Meghan snapped, finally losing her calm. "You have no idea what it's like to be trapped in that situation." "Trapped?" Maher interrupted. "You married into it willingly. Nobody forced you, and when you didn't like it, you left. That's not being trapped. That's making choices." The audience was riveted. This was exactly the kind of confrontation Maher was known for. But Meghan hadn't signed up for this kind of scrutiny. "You're being incredibly reductive," she said, her voice rising slightly. "The situation was far more complex than you're making it out to be." "Then explain it," Maher challenged. "Give me specifics. Who said what, when, where? Help me understand why I should believe these accusations without details." Meghan opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She glanced around as if searching for an escape route. But the cameras were still rolling, and Maher wasn't done. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like I'm on trial," she finally said, her voice strained. "I came here to discuss my humanitarian work, not to relitigate the past. Maher chuckled, shaking his head. See, that's the problem. You can't drop bombshells about racism and then act like follow-up questions are unfair. That's not how this works. What's unfair is the way you're twisting my words, Meghan shot back, her media training now gone. I never said the royal family was racist. I said there were concerns about my son's skin color. Oh, come on, Maher replied, voice dripping with skepticism. That's like saying you never called someone stupid. You just said they had intellectual concerns. Same thing, just prettier language. The crowd was transfixed. What had started as an interview had turned into a masterclass in how not to handle tough questions. Meghan's publicist, phone forgotten, stared at the stage with the look of someone watching a slow-motion crash. "You're putting words in my mouth," Meghan insisted. But her voice lacked conviction. She was clearly flustered, and Marr could sense blood in the water. "I'm using your words," he replied calmly. "Let me ask you this. If these conversations about your son's skin color weren't racist, then what were they? Meteorological discussions? Fashion consultations?" "You're being ridiculous," Meghan said, her composure cracking further. "Of course they were problematic," she began, but Marr cut her off. "But you won't say who said them or what exactly was said. So we're just supposed to take your word for it, that this terrible thing happened, without knowing any details, because it would be too damaging to the people you're accusing." "Yes, exactly," Meghan answered, apparently unaware of how that sounded. "Do you hear yourself right now?" Marr asked, incredulous. "You're asking people to believe serious allegations without providing any actual evidence. That's not how justice works. That's how witch hunts work." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What had started as entertainment was quickly veering into awkward, tense territory. Meghan looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "I don't have to provide evidence to you or anyone else," she said, her voice taking on an imperious tone that reminded everyone why she had become such a controversial figure. "My truth is my truth." "There it is again," Marr said, seizing the opening. "Your truth. What happened to just plain truth? The kind that exists whether you believe it or not?" "Truth is subjective," Meghan countered, and several people in the audience groaned audibly. "No, it's not," Marr replied firmly. "Interpretation is subjective. Perspective is subjective. Truth is truth. Either someone made racist comments about your son, or they didn't. Either you were treated unfairly or you weren't. You can't have it both ways." Meghan was visibly struggling now. Her face was flushed, and her eyes darted toward the exit, as if calculating how fast she could leave. "I think this line of questioning is inappropriate," she said, trying to regain control. I'm not going to be bullied on national television." "Bullied?" Marr laughed, genuine amusement in his voice. "Lady, I'm asking you to explain statements you made publicly. If that's bullying, then every journalist in America is guilty of assault." "You're being deliberately obtuse," Meghan snapped. "You know exactly what you're doing." "Yeah, I do," Marr said coolly. "I'm doing journalism. You remember what that is, right? Where people ask questions and expect actual answers, not word salad about personal truth and subjective reality." The studio had fallen into complete silence. Everyone knew they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed for years. "Let me try a different approach," Marr continued, leaning forward. "You've talked a lot about how the media treated you unfairly. But isn't it true you courted that same media when it served your purposes? The carefully staged photos, the strategic leaks, the anonymous sources backing up your version of every story?" Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. "That's absolutely not true." "Really? Because there's a pretty clear pattern here. When coverage was positive, you were happy to engage with the press. When it turned negative, suddenly they were all racist and sexist. Isn't that a bit convenient?" "You have no idea what you're talking about," Meghan shot back, her voice rising. The harassment I faced was unprecedented. Was it, though? Maher challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you got the same treatment every other celebrity gets. You just didn't like it. And instead of developing thicker skin, you played the victim card. That was the breaking point. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this, she declared, her voice shaking with anger. This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity that— Oh, here we go, Maher interrupted with a grin. When all else fails, break out the buzzwords. What's next? Are you going to tell me I'm mansplaining? You are mansplaining, Meghan shot back, pointing an accusing finger at him. You're dismissing my experiences, talking over me, acting like you know better than I do about my own life. The audience was riveted. This had officially become one of the most uncomfortable interviews in television history. I'm not dismissing your experiences, Maher said evenly. I'm questioning your version of them. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see that is exactly the problem. Meghan remained standing, swaying slightly as if unsure whether to sit back down or walk off. Her publicist stood in the front row, frantically signaling for her to end the disaster. You know what? Meghan said finally, her voice dripping with disdain. I should have known better than to expect intelligent discourse from someone who makes a living mocking people on television. The audience gasped. The studio was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. Maher raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. Mocking people? He repeated, his voice low and sharp. Lady, I've been doing political commentary for 30 years. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, and actual intellectuals. What I don't do is coddle celebrities who think their feelings are more important than facts. ChatGPT said, You think systemic racism is about feelings? You think being driven to the point of having suicidal thoughts is about feelings? I think using serious issues like mental health and racism as shields to deflect legitimate criticism is disgusting, Ma replied, his tone cutting through the studio like a blade. And I think someone who really cared about those issues would want to have an honest conversation about them instead of hiding behind buzzwords and victim status. Meghan took a step backward as if she'd been physically struck. How dare you question my mental health struggles? I'm not questioning your mental health, Ma said, standing up now to match her energy. I'm questioning your integrity. There's a difference, though I'm starting to wonder if you know what that word means. The tension in the studio was so thick, it could be cut with a knife. Security guards shifted nervously at the edges of the stage, clearly preparing for the possibility that things might escalate beyond words. You're a misogynistic bully, Meghan said, her voice shaking with fury. And this is exactly why women don't speak up about their experiences, because men like you tear them down and question everything they say. Men like me? Ma laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean men who ask follow-up questions? Men who expect consistency in your story. Men who don't automatically believe every word that comes out of your mouth just because you're a woman. You're proving my point, Meghan said triumphantly. You can't handle a strong woman who speaks her truth. There's that phrase again, Ma said, shaking his head in disbelief. Your truth. I'm done pretending that's a real thing. Truth isn't personal. Truth isn't subjective. Truth is what actually happened, not what you wish had happened or what fits your narrative. My narrative? Meghan's voice rose to a near shriek. You think surviving institutional racism is a narrative? You think being abandoned by my own family is a narrative? I think you're very good at reframing every criticism as an attack on your identity, Ma replied coldly. Can't question Meghan's story because that's racist. Can't ask for details because that's sexist. Can't expect consistency because that's victim blaming. It's very convenient, but it's not very convincing. Meghan looked around the studio, almost desperate for someone to step in. But the audience sat in stunned silence. Even her own publicist, Looked like she wanted to crawl under her chair. "I'm not going to stand here and be attacked," Meghan declared, grabbing her purse. "This is harassment, plain and simple." "Harassment?" Ma's voice was incredulous. "You agreed to do this interview. You came on my show. Nobody forced you to be here, and nobody's forcing you to stay. But don't act like being asked tough questions is somehow persecution." "These aren't tough questions," Meghan snapped. "These are gotcha questions designed to make me look bad. This is exactly the kind of media manipulation that drove me out of public life in the first place." "No," Ma said firmly. "What drove you out of public life was the fact that you couldn't handle the scrutiny that comes with being a public figure. You wanted all the perks of celebrity without any of the accountability." "That's not true," Meghan said, but her voice lacked conviction now. She was clearly rattled, and everyone in the studio could see it. "Isn't it?" Ma pressed. "You wanted the platform. You wanted the influence. You wanted the adoration. But the moment people started asking hard questions, you cried racism and ran away. That's not courage. That's cowardice." "I'm not a coward," Meghan said, her voice deadly quiet. "I am a survivor." "Survivor of what exactly?" Ma asked. "A life of incredible privilege? A brief stint in one of the most prestigious institutions in the world? A marriage to a prince? There are people fighting actual oppression who would kill for the opportunities you've had." That was the final straw. Meghan turned toward the exit without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor. But Ma wasn't done. "You know what the real tragedy is?" he called after her. "You could have been a force for positive change. You had a platform people would have killed for. But instead of using it to lift others up, you used it to tear down anyone who dared to question your version of events." Meghan stopped walking, but didn't turn around. For a moment, it looked like she might respond. But then, she straightened her shoulders and continued toward the exit. "This interview is over," she announced to no one in particular, her voice echoing through the silent studio. "No," Ma said, settling back into his chair with a satisfied smile. "Now it's over." Security escorted Meghan out as the audience sat in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly go down as one of the most explosive interviews in television history. And there you have it. What happens when entitlement meets accountability? When victim status meets genuine journalism? When someone who's used to controlling the narrative finally meets someone who refuses to play along? This was television at its most raw and unfiltered. And whether you love Bill Maher or hate him, you have to admit, he asked the questions everyone else was too afraid to ask.